There's something to be said for a quiet morning with your coffee and the newspaper spread out just so on the kitchen counter. David Collins had perfected this ritual over the years. 63 years of mornings had taught him the value of a peaceful start to the day. But this particular December morning, well, it was about to teach him something entirely different. The phone buzzed against the granite countertop like an impatient bee. David smiled, seeing his daughter's name on the screen. Brianna. After 32 years of being her father, he still got that little flutter of pride whenever she reached out. Funny how that never changes, isn't it? No matter how old they get, they're still your little ones. We want to spend Christmas quietly with our in-laws, the message read. Now, I've been around long enough to know that sometimes the simplest sentences carry the heaviest loads. David read those words once, then twice, then a third time for good measure. The morning sunlight streaming through his kitchen windows seemed to dim just a touch, the way it does when a cloud passes over the sun unexpectedly. 30 years. That's how long he'd been the go-to fellow for every crisis, every need, every want that crossed his daughter's path. The memories came flooding back like slides in an old Viewmaster. Remember those? Click, and there's Brianna's college tuition at Emory University, $60,000 a year when she changed majors like some folks change their socks. Psychology to communications to business, each switch accompanied by that familiar refrain. Daddy, I really think this is my calling now. Click again, and there's her wedding to Cody. David's contribution alone was $45,000. We want to be perfect, Dad. It's a once-in-a-lifetime day. He'd watched her dance in a dress that cost more than most folks' cars while Cody's family contributed their blessing and, I kid you not, a fruit tray from the grocery store. Then came the house down payment just last year. Another $80,000. We found a perfect place, Daddy. The neighborhood is amazing for when we have kids. Kids that never came, but the payments to dear old Dad? Well, those kept coming regular as clockwork. Every phone call followed the same script. Dad, I hate to ask, but... Though she never seemed to hate it quite enough to stop asking, if you catch my meaning. David walked to the window, overlooking his carefully tended garden. This villa, purchased just last month for a tidy $2.8 million, was supposed to be his reward. His sanctuary. The place where he'd finally host Christmas dinner in style, where his family would see what their father had built through decades of smart thinking and careful planning. You see, while others were calling his cryptocurrency investments gambling, David was quietly building a fortune. While his peers said he was too old to understand the tech market, his startup investments were paying off handsomely. His consulting business thrived because, well, wisdom doesn't have an expiration date, does it? But none of that seemed to matter to Brianna. To her, he was just a bank account with a heartbeat, a reliable old fellow who opened his wallet whenever life got complicated. Spend Christmas quietly with the in-laws. Translation: your money is welcome, but you're not. Now, I've learned that sometimes the best lessons come disguised as disappointments. David felt something shift inside him. Not anger exactly, but something colder and clearer. He'd spent enough years being taken for granted. Time to show them what Christmas looked like when people actually wanted to be there. He pulled up his contacts and found his brother Robert's number first. The phone rang twice before that familiar, gravelly voice answered. The voice that sounded like their father's after too many years of Lucky Strikes and black coffee. David, perfect timing. I was just thinking about Christmas plans. Robert, I need to ask you something. Are you and Sarah free for Christmas dinner? I'm hosting at the villa. Hell yes. Sarah's been dying to see your new place. What brought this on? I thought you were going Brianna's. David glanced at the text message, still glowing on his phone screen. Change of plans. She's spending Christmas quietly with the in-laws. The silence that followed was the kind that speaks volumes. When Robert's voice came back, it carried the sharp edge of a man who'd been biting his tongue for too long. That ungrateful little, Robert caught himself. You know what, David? This is going to be the best Christmas dinner you've ever hosted. People who actually appreciate what you've done for them. After hanging up, David walked through his empty villa with fresh eyes. The formal dining room that could seat 12. The chef's kitchen with its double ovens and warming drawers. The entertainment room, with its massive fireplace and windows that looked out over a view that could make a greeting card jealous. This wasn't just a house. It was a statement, and it was high time he made it. The next calls went to Tom Richardson, his former business partner who'd helped broker the deal that netted David 7 figures. Then Patricia Webb, who'd been there when his startup went public. People who'd witnessed his successes, not just balanced his checkbooks. Tom Richardson speaking. Tom, it's David Collins. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. David, never a bad time for you. What's up? David explained briefly. Christmas dinner at his place. Close friends only. December 23rd at 6. Tom's enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. Are you kidding? Linda and I have been hoping for an invitation to see the famous villa. She's still talking about the housewarming photos you sent. Count us in, absolutely. Each conversation reminded David of something he'd forgotten. He had friends, real ones. People who valued his company, not his contributions to their monthly budgets. By 4 o'clock, the catering order was placed for Morton's prime rib, because life's too short for anything less. The wine selected from his cellar, that 2018 Cassis Cabernet he'd been saving for a special occasion. Well, this qualified. The house was ready, and his guest list was solid. 10 people who would appreciate both the food and the company. 10 people who saw him as more than a walking, talking funding source. The doorbell chimed at exactly 6 o'clock the next evening, punctual as a Swiss watch. Through the foyer windows, David could see Robert's familiar silhouette holding a bottle of wine, with Sarah beside him carrying what looked like a covered dish. Some things never change. Sarah still brought something homemade to every gathering, bless her heart. Jesus, David. Robert stepped inside and took in a 2-story entryway with its curved staircase and crystal chandelier. Photos don't do this place justice. Sarah was already moving through the space, her eyes taking in every detail like she was memorizing it for later. The millwork alone must have cost a fortune. And these windows, it's like something out of one of those fancy magazines. Before David could respond, car doors slammed in the driveway like a well-orchestrated symphony. The Richardsons emerged from their BMW, followed by the Hendersons in their Mercedes. Within minutes, his foyer was filled with the kind of warm greetings and genuine excitement that makes a house feel like a home. David, this is incredible. Linda Richardson turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. When you said you bought a place, I pictured something nice. This is magnificent. The words landed differently than they would have coming from Brianna. These people weren't calculating costs or wondering what they could get from him. They were simply happy for his success, the way real friends are supposed to be. David led the group through the main living area, pointing out features he'd chosen carefully. The imported marble fireplace, the custom built-ins, the sound system that could make Sinatra sound like he was right there in the room with you. You've really made it, haven't you? Mark Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. All those years of smart investing finally paying off. Patricia Webb arrived fashionably late with her promise tiramisu and immediately began documenting everything with her phone. David, you have to let me post some photos. This place is stunning, and you look so happy. And you know what? He nodded. Why not? He'd worked hard for this success. He deserved to share it with people who celebrated his achievements rather than resented them. The evening flowed like good wine, smooth and warming. Cocktails in the living room. Dinner in the formal dining room, where the prime rib was perfect and the conversation moved effortlessly between shared memories and future plans. Remember when you first told us about investing in Bitcoin? Tom raised his glass toward David. We all thought you'd lost your mind. Some of us, Linda corrected with a laugh. I told Tom we should follow David's lead, but he was too scared. Best decision you ever ignored me on, Tom admitted. Look where it got him. David felt something he'd forgotten existed. Genuine respect. These weren't people who saw him as a resource to be tapped. They were friends celebrating a friend's success. Robert stood for an impromptu toast. To my brother David, who never lost faith in himself even when the rest of us couldn't see the vision. And to this beautiful home where we're finally getting the Christmas celebration he deserves. The glasses clinked, the laughter continued, and for the first time in years, David felt truly valued. Patricia had been taking photos throughout the evening, candid shots of conversations, group photos by the fireplace, artistic shots of the dinner table that looked like something from a magazine. "These are going straight to Facebook," she announced. "Everyone needs to see how beautiful this turned out." David didn't object. Let the world see what success looked like when it was shared with the right people. The party was humming along nicely when David's phone began buzzing against his leg like an angry wasp. He glanced at the screen through his pocket and felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Brianna. He excused himself from the conversation and moved toward his home office, the sound of genuine laughter and friendship following him down the hall. He stepped into his sanctuary and closed the door before answering. "Hello, Brianna. What the hell is this?" No greeting, no pleasantries. Just that sharp, angry tone that could cut glass. "Patricia Webb just posted photos of some party at your house with Robert and everyone." David leaned against his desk, processing her tone. She'd seen the social media posts. "It's Christmas dinner. You said you wanted to spend Christmas quietly with the in-laws." "I never said that." The denial was so immediate, so defensive that David almost chuckled. "Would you like me to read your text message back to you?" Silence. Then, like a petulant child, "That's not what I meant. We want to spend Christmas quietly with the in-laws." David read the exact words from his phone screen. "What part of that was unclear?" "You're being deliberately obtuse. You knew what I meant." "Actually, I didn't. I thought it meant you wanted a quiet Christmas with Cody's family instead of coming to see your father. So I made other plans." Her breathing was audible through the phone, quick and frustrated like a steam kettle building pressure. "You went behind my back. You invited everyone except us. I invited people who wanted to spend Christmas with me. You specifically said you didn't." Then came the question that revealed everything. Where did this house even come from? How can you afford a place like this? There it was. Not heard about being excluded from Christmas dinner. Shock about wealth she didn't know existed. Money she couldn't control. "I've been successful, Brianna. More successful than you realized, apparently." "Successful how? You never told me about any house purchase, about having this kind of money." David felt something crystallize inside him, a cold clarity he hadn't experienced in years. "I don't know you a financial report. I'm a grown man who made good investments and built a successful business. This house is the result of 30 years of hard work." "But Dad, no." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. "I won't be guilt for celebrating with people who appreciate me. I won't apologize for having success you didn't know about. And I won't pretend that your text message meant anything other than what it clearly stated." The silence stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken resentment finally finding its voice. "You're being spiteful," she said finally. "This is because I can't come to dinner one time. This is because for 30 years, I've been nothing more than a bank account to you. Because every conversation starts with what you need from me, never with what you can give back. Because you take my support for granted while showing me no respect." "That's not true. When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you showed interest in my life that didn't involve what I could provide for yours?" Another silence. Longer this time. "I have friends here tonight who are genuinely happy for my success, who celebrate my achievements instead of calculating what they can get from them. This is what Christmas looks like when people actually want to be here. You can't just exclude family because—" "I didn't exclude family. You excluded yourself." David's voice was calm now, steady as bedrock. "You made your choice. I made mine. This isn't over, Dad." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. "You can't just cut us out because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." The line went dead. David stood in the quiet of his office, phone still in his hand, processing what had just happened. Through the closed door, he could hear the continued sound of celebration. Genuine laughter, animated conversation, the clink of glasses raised in authentic joy. For the first time in 30 years, he'd drawn a line in the sand, and it felt exactly right. 20 minutes later, the pounding started. Not knocking, mind you, not ringing the doorbell like civilized people do. This was violent, aggressive hammering that made the solid oak door shudder in its frame like something from a horror movie. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. Every face in the room turned toward the front entrance with identical expressions of shock. "Open this door right now." Brianna's voice cut through the night air like a buzz saw. "I know you're in there." David's stomach dropped to somewhere around his ankles. She'd actually done it. Actually driven across town to create a scene in front of his guests. The pounding resumed, harder now. Bang, bang, bang. "Brianna, lower your voice," David called through the door, moving toward it with measured steps. "We can discuss this civilly. Don't tell me what to do." Her shriek made several guests wince. "This is ridiculous. You can't just exclude family because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." Cody's weaker voice joined the chorus. "Come on, David. Just open up. We can work this out." David looked back at his guests, friends who'd come for a peaceful Christmas dinner and found themselves witnessing a family meltdown. Their faces showed everything from embarrassment to outright anger on his behalf. "I'm sorry about this," he said to the room. Robert stepped forward, his jaw set like concrete. "Don't apologize. You're not responsible for her behavior." The pounding intensified. The neighbors would hear this. The whole street would know about the Collins family drama by morning. David reached for the deadbolt, knowing he had to end this circus before it got worse. The moment the lock clicked, the door flew open with enough force to bang against the wall. Brianna stormed in like a hurricane, making landfall, with Cody trailing behind her looking like a man who'd lost all control of his life. "How dare you?" She pointed a shaking finger at David while scanning the room full of his guests. "How dare you throw some party and exclude your own daughter?" The living room fell silent except for the tick of the mantel clock. 10 pairs of eyes watched David's 32-year-old daughter throw a tantrum worthy of a toddler who'd been told she couldn't have cookies before dinner. "Brianna, you're making a scene." "I don't care." She whirled around, taking in the villa's elegant furnishings, the crystal stemware, the obvious expense of everything around her. "Where did all this come from? How long have you been hiding money from me?" Patricia Webb stepped forward, phone in hand like a shield. "Excuse me, but this is a private dinner party. You're being incredibly rude." Brianna's attention snapped to her like a heat-seeking missile. You're the one posting pictures on Facebook. This is all your fault." "I posted pictures of a beautiful home and a lovely evening with friends," Patricia replied with the calm dignity of a woman who'd raised 3 teenagers. "Nothing inappropriate about that. It was inappropriate because I wasn't invited." "You declined," David said quietly. "In writing. That's not what I meant, and you know it." The absurdity of the situation was becoming crystal clear to everyone in the room. Here was a grown woman, furious that her father had celebrated Christmas with people who actually wanted to be there. Tom Richardson's voice cut through the chaos. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. This is completely unacceptable behavior." "Don't tell me what's acceptable." Brianna spun toward him. "This is between me and my father." "Not anymore it isn't," Robert said, his voice carrying a warning that could freeze water. "You've made it everyone's business by barging in here and screaming." Cody finally found his voice, weak as watered-down coffee. "Maybe we should just go home." "And no." Brianna silenced him with a look that could kill houseplants. "I'm not leaving until this gets resolved." She pulled out her phone, fingers moving rapidly across the screen like a pianist playing a frantic sonata. "What are you doing?" David asked. She looked up with a smile that chilled him to the bone. "Calling the police. If you won't listen to reason, maybe they'll make you understand." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. David's guests, successful, respectable people who'd done nothing but accept a dinner invitation, stared in disbelief. "The police." Linda Richardson's voice was incredulous. "For what?" "For this." Brianna gestured wildly around the room like a game show hostess gone mad. "For stealing family Christmas. For hiding assets. For elder abuse." The last accusation hung in the air like poison gas. David watched his daughter, phone pressed to her ear, preparing to weaponize law enforcement because her father had dared to celebrate Christmas without her permission. The sirens grew louder as they approached David's quiet neighborhood, those red and blue lights flashing through the villa's windows like some twisted Christmas display. 2 officers emerged from the patrol car, a veteran sergeant with graying temples who'd probably seen everything twice, and a younger officer carrying a tablet like it was the Holy Grail. They approached the door with professional neutrality, though David caught them glancing around at the obviously peaceful suburban setting. "Good evening," the sergeant said when David opened the door. "We received a complaint about excessive noise and possible domestic disturbance. I'm Sergeant Martinez. This is Officer Norman." Brianna pushed forward before David could respond, like she was rushing to catch the last bus home. "Yes, thank you for coming. They're having this loud party and completely harassing me." Sergeant Martinez's experienced eyes took in the scene. A well-dressed group of adults holding wine glasses, soft jazz playing in the background, no evidence of excessive noise or disturbance beyond Brianna herself. "Ma'am, can you step outside, please?" Then to David, "Sir, is this your residence?" "Yes, it is. This is a quiet dinner party with family and friends." The sergeant nodded to his partner, who began taking notes. "How many people are inside?" 10 guests total. We've been having Christmas dinner." "The noise level seems quite reasonable now," Officer Norman observed, glancing at his watch. "Nearly 11 p.m., and I can barely hear conversation from out here." Brianna's voice rose frantically. It was much louder earlier. They were being completely inappropriate for a residential area. "Ma'am, what's your relationship to the homeowner?" "He's my father, and he's been excluding me from family events. This is elder abuse." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David felt his guest's sharp intake of breath behind him. "Sir, do you feel you're being abused or threatened in any way?" Sergeant Martinez asked directly. "No, officer. I'm hosting a voluntary gathering of friends and family in my own home." Robert stepped forward like a character witness in a courtroom drama. "Officers, I'm David's brother. My daughter received a text message this morning saying she wanted a quiet Christmas with the in-laws instead of joining family. So David invited people who actually wanted to celebrate with him." "You have his text message?" Officer Norman asked. Robert pulled out his phone and showed them the SMS thread David had forwarded earlier. Sergeant Martinez read it carefully, his expression suggesting he'd seen this particular brand of family drama before. "So you declined the invitation in writing, ma'am?" "That's not what I meant." Brianna's voice cracked with frustration. "The message seems pretty clear," Officer Norman said diplomatically. Cody finally spoke up, his voice weak and uncomfortable. "Maybe we should just go home and sort this out privately." "No," Brianna spun on him. "They need to understand this is inappropriate." Tom Richardson approached from inside, looking every inch the successful businessman he was. "Officers, I'm sorry you were called out for this. We've been having a perfectly quiet evening. Most of us are in our 60s and 70s. Hardly a rowdy crowd." The sergeant's expression suggested he was reaching the same conclusion any reasonable person would. "Sir, have any neighbors complained about noise?" "Not that I'm aware of. We haven't received any other calls about this address tonight," Officer Norman confirmed, checking his tablet. "How did you know about this gathering, ma'am?" Sergeant Martinez asked Brianna. "I saw photos on Facebook." The officers exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their assessment of the situation. "Ma'am, you called in a noise complaint about an event you learned about through social media?" Brianna's face flushed red as a Christmas ornament. "It's the principal. This is harassment." "Sir," the sergeant addressed David, "you have every right to entertain guests on your own property, provided you're not violating noise ordinances. From what we can observe, you're well within reasonable limits." "What about the elder abuse?" Brianna demanded desperately. Sergeant Martinez looked at David with professional assessment. "Sir, do you have any concerns about your safety or well-being? Are you being coerced or threatened in any way?" "Only by the person who called you," David replied quietly. The officer's slight nod indicated he understood exactly who the problem was in this little drama. "Ma'am, filing false reports is a serious matter. We're going to need you to move your vehicle, which is blocking the driveway, and allow these people to conclude their evening peacefully." Brianna stared at him in shock, her manipulation having spectacularly backfired like a car engine on a cold morning. "This isn't over," she said to David, but her voice carried less conviction than before. The officers returned to their patrol car, and David watched their red and blue lights disappear into the night, taking with them the last of his tolerance for his daughter's dramatics. Brianna stood on his doorstep, deflated and humiliated. The police dismissal had shattered her confidence, leaving her looking smaller somehow, more vulnerable than David had seen her in years. Cody shifted beside her, clearly wishing he were anywhere else, maybe on a desert island or in witness protection. "Brianna," David said quietly, "would you like to come in and talk privately?" She looked up with surprise, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle in the wind. Maybe she thought the police intervention had broken through his resolve. David led her to his home office while Robert shepherded the guests back toward the living room, giving them space for what needed to be said. Cody remained in the foyer, studying his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. "Dad," Brianna began the moment he closed the office door, "I need you to understand something." David settled into his desk chair and waited, the way you wait for a shoe to drop or a pot to boil. "I never meant for things to go this far. The text message, I didn't mean it the way you interpreted it. Help me understand what you did mean then." There was again the real issue. Not Christmas dinner, not family traditions. Control, access, the fear of losing her personal ATM. "I haven't been hiding anything, Brianna. I've been successful, more successful than you realized. But why didn't you tell me? I'm your daughter. Do I owe you a financial report every month? Are my investments subject to your approval?" Her face flushed. "That's not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" I mean, I need to know you'll still be there for me, that nothing's changed." David felt something break inside his chest, like a dam finally giving way after holding back years of floodwater. After everything, the text message, the confrontation, the police call, she was still trying to manipulate him into maintaining the status quo. "What if things have changed, Brianna?" Her eyes widened like she'd been slapped. "What do you mean? What if I'm tired of being treated like a bank account? What if I want a relationship with my daughter that isn't based on what I can provide?" "You're being dramatic. I don't treat you like a bank account." David pulled out his phone and scrolled through their text history like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Your last 10 messages to me. Dad, can you help with the car payment? Dad, we need help with the roof repair. Dad, Cody's between jobs again. When was the last time you texted to ask how I was feeling? To share good news? To just say hello?" She stared at the phone screen, her mouth working soundlessly like a fish out of water. "I love you, Brianna. I always will, but I won't continue enabling a relationship that only flows in one direction. You can't just cut me off. I'm not cutting you off. I'm asking for mutual respect." Her expression hardened like concrete setting. "This is because of Robert, isn't it? He's always been jealous of our relationship." David stood up, feeling the weight of finality settling over him like snow on a winter evening. "This is because I finally realized I deserve better than being taken for granted." She began to cry then, but even her tears felt calculated, designed to manipulate rather than express genuine emotion. David had seen this performance before, usually right before he wrote another check. "Please, Dad, don't do this. I need you. You need my money. There's a difference." He walked toward the door, ready to return his guests. People who valued him for who he was, not what he could provide. Behind him, he heard her whisper, "This isn't over." But looking at his reflection in the office window, David realized it was. The man looking back at him wasn't the same fellow who'd read that text message this morning. This was a man who'd finally learned the difference between being used and being loved. When David walked back toward the living room, Brianna followed like a storm cloud that just wouldn't blow over. The moment they entered the main room, she launched her final attack. "I need everyone to understand something," she announced loudly, positioning herself in the center of his guests like an actress taking center stage. "My father has been hiding money from our family for years. Money that should have been disclosed." The room fell silent as a church on Tuesday morning. 10 pairs of eyes shifted between father and daughter, watching this desperate performance with growing discomfort. "Brianna," David began. "No," she spun to face Tom Richardson. "Did you know he bought this house without telling his own daughter? $2.8 million. Where do you think that money came from?" Tom's eyebrows rose like theater curtains. "From his investments and hard work, I imagine." Same place my money comes from. You don't understand. He's been manipulating financial records, hiding assets. That's enough. Robert stepped forward, his voice carrying the kind of warning you hear before thunder. I can support them. Brianna shot back. He's been stealing from family accounts to fund this lifestyle. Patricia Webb actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of sound you make when someone tells you the moon is made of green cheese. Brianna, your father showed us his portfolio 3 years ago when he was considering retirement. Every penny came from legitimate investments he made decades before you were born. She's right, Mark Henderson added. David, didn't you get into Bitcoin when it was under $100? David nodded. Purchased my first coins in 2011. In the tech startup investments, Linda Richardson prompted. Multiple companies starting in 2015. 3 went public. 2 were acquired. Brianna's face flushed as the mathematical reality hit the room like a splash of cold water. David's wealth wasn't mysterious or stolen. It was well documented and witnessed by people who'd known him for decades. But he never told me, she protested weakly. Why would he? Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the nonsense like a hot knife through butter. You've never shown interest in his life unless you needed something from him. The brutal truth hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Even Cody shifted uncomfortably, finally understanding how his wife appeared to others. That's not true. Brianna's voice cracked. I've always cared about my father. When? Robert challenged. When was the last time you called to ask about his health, his happiness, his plans? Silence. When was the last time you invited him to your house for dinner? Patricia added. More silence. When was the last time you celebrated one of his achievements without calculating what you could get from it? Tom's question landed like the final nail in a coffin. Brianna looked around the room, seeing her isolation complete. Even her husband couldn't meet her eyes. You don't understand our relationship, she whispered desperately. We understand it perfectly, David said quietly. And that's the problem. He took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, feeling the weight of 30 years lifting from his shoulders like fog clearing from a mountaintop. I want you both to leave my home and never return. The words dropped into absolute silence. Brianna stared at him as if he'd just announced he was joining the circus. You can't be serious. Each statement hit like a hammer blow. Brianna looked around the room desperately, seeking any supportive face. Cody, tell them. Tell them this is wrong. Her husband looked at her for a long moment, then at David. Brianna, we should go. You too. Her voice broke. You're taking a side too? I'm not taking sides. I'm recognizing reality. Cody's voice was tired, defeated. He's right, Bree. We both know he's right. David moved to the front door and opened it. The December night air rushed in, cold and clean. I've spent 30 years enabling behavior that hurt both of us. I won't spend what time I have left being treated like a bank account with a heartbeat. I'll change. Brianna's voice turned pleading. I promise I'll be different. I'll show more appreciation. I'll call more often. You had 30 years to change, Brianna. Tonight proved you can. But I'm your daughter, and I'm a human being who deserves basic respect, something you've never been able to provide. She looked around the room one final time, seeing nothing but stone faces and disappointed shakes of heads. You'll regret this, she said, her voice hardening like cooling metal. All of you will regret taking his side when you see what kind of man he really is. We already know what kind of man he is, Sarah said firmly. We've known for decades. That's why we're here. Robert moved to stand beside David at the open door. Brianna, you need to leave now. She walked toward the exit with Cody trailing behind her, his shoulders slumped like a man carrying invisible baggage. At the threshold, she turned back one final time. This isn't over, Dad. I won't let you cut me out of your life like this. Yes, David said quietly, his voice steady as granite. It is over. And you cut yourself out the moment you chose manipulation over love. He closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolt with a decisive click. The sound echoed through the foyer like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The noise of their cars starting and pulling away felt like the end of one life and the beginning of another. Behind him, he heard the quiet murmur of his friends, his real family, resuming their celebration. For the first time in 30 years, his home was filled only with people who valued him for who he was, not what he could provide. David had finally learned the difference between being used and being loved, and it felt like freedom. He stood in his foyer for a moment, hands still on the deadbolt, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. 30 years of enabling, 30 years of walking on eggshells, 30 years of being treated like a resource rather than a person. All of it finished. The weight he'd carried for so long lifted from his shoulders like morning fog clearing from the hills. When he turned back toward the living room, he found his friends waiting with expressions of pride and admiration he hadn't seen directed at him in years. "David," Patricia said quietly, "that took incredible courage." Tom Richardson stood and began to clap slowly, deliberately. One by one, the others joined him until the room filled with genuine applause. Not for a performance, but for a man who'd finally chosen to respect himself. "You handled that with more grace than she deserved," Linda added. Robert stepped forward and embraced his brother, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been waiting 30 years for you to do that. I'm so proud of you." The validation hit David like a warm wave. These people, his real family, had witnessed everything and stood by him. They'd seen Brianna's true nature and David's transformation, and they celebrated justice being served. Sarah raised her wine glass. To David Collins, a man who chose dignity over guilt and peace over chaos. To authentic relationships, Mark Henderson added. To knowing your worth, Patricia chimed in. They drank, and David felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The pure joy of being valued for who he was, not what he could provide. Robert pulled him aside while the others continued celebrating. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," David said without hesitation. "For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free." "You're not losing a daughter tonight, David. You're gaining your life back." He was right. The woman who just left wasn't the little girl David had taught to ride a bike or helped with homework. That girl had been replaced somewhere along the way by someone who saw him only as a source of funding for her lifestyle. "She made her choice 30 years ago," Robert continued. "Tonight you finally made yours." Linda Richardson approached them, her face thoughtful. "David, I want to apologize." "For what?" "For all the times over the years when I wanted to say something about how she treated you, but held my tongue. We all saw it. We all knew you deserved better." Tom nodded agreement. "We should have spoken up sooner. But tonight, watching you stand up for yourself, that was beautiful to witness." The conversation gradually turned to the future, to what life would look like without toxic family dynamics poisoning every holiday. What would Christmas look like next year? What about New Year's Eve? David's birthday in March? "You should host New Year's here," Sarah suggested. "A celebration of new beginnings." "I'd love that." David realized he meant it. All of them there, bringing in 2025 together. "And your birthday," Patricia added. "A proper celebration for a man who deserves to be celebrated." For the first time in years, David felt excited about future gatherings. No more walking on eggshells, wondering what mood someone would be in or what demand would come next. Just authentic relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "I can't believe I actually did it," David said, almost to himself. "Believe it," Robert said firmly. "You chose yourself tonight. You chose peace." Around 2:30 in the morning, people began gathering their coats. The evening had been emotionally intense, and dawn wasn't far away. As each person prepared to leave, the hugs were warmer, longer than usual. These weren't just social obligations. These were bonds forged in truth and strengthened by justice. "Thank you," David said to each person, "for witnessing this, for supporting me, for being my real family." The gratitude went both ways. Each guest had seen something remarkable, a man finally standing up for his own worth after decades of being taken for granted. As the last car pulled out of his driveway, David walked back into his villa, truly his sanctuary now. The house felt different, larger somehow, as if removing toxic energy had physically expanded the space. Each message felt like a warm embrace, confirmation that he'd made the right choice. David thought about his resources, the investments, the villa, the financial freedom he'd worked decades to achieve. For the first time, it was truly his to enjoy and share as he chose. No more guilt about not being fair to someone who'd never shown fairness to him. He could travel now. Take that river cruise through Europe he'd always wanted. Visit the vineyards in Tuscany. Maybe take a cooking class in Paris. The world felt open in ways it hadn't since he was young. Or he could stay here and create the kind of home he'd always dreamed of, one filled with laughter instead of tension, appreciation instead of demands, love instead of obligation. The eastern windows began to glow with the first hint of dawn. Christmas Eve was beginning, and for the first time in 30 years, David was genuinely excited about the holiday. No walking on eggshells, no careful gift selection to avoid criticism, no calculating how much money would be enough to keep the peace. Just the simple pleasure of celebrating with people who wanted to celebrate with him. His phone rang. Robert checking on him. "How are you holding up?" his brother asked. "Better than I've felt in decades," David answered honestly. "I keep waiting for the guilt to hit, but it's not coming." It won't. Guilt requires wrongdoing, and you did nothing wrong tonight except protect your dignity. "I think I'll spend Christmas Day alone," David said. "Not lonely. Alone. There's a difference." There absolutely is. And you've earned the right to peaceful solitude. After they hung up, David stepped onto his terrace as the sun crested the horizon. The December air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of new seasons ahead. At 63, he was finally beginning his authentic life. The years ahead stretched before him, filled with possibility rather than obligation, respect rather than exploitation, joy rather than guilt. He thought about calling that travel agent later today, maybe booking a trip to Ireland for St. Patrick's Day or Australia for their autumn. The freedom to make plans without consulting someone else's emotional calendar felt revolutionary. As the sunrise painted his villa in gold, David realized this wasn't just Christmas morning. It was the first day of his real life. He had chosen dignity over duty, peace over chaos, self-respect over family obligation. And it felt like coming home to himself after a lifetime of being a stranger in his own life. The best gift he'd ever given himself was the courage to demand the respect he'd spent 63 years earning. Christmas had finally come home. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to stop accepting less than we deserve. Sometimes love means saying no. And sometimes the family that matters most is the one we choose for ourselves. People who value us for who we are, not what we can provide. David Collins learned that it's never too late to start over, never too late to demand respect, and never too late to discover what real love looks like. His villa was more than just a house. It was proof that success shared with the right people is the sweetest success of all. As for Christmas dinner, well, it turns out the best celebrations happen when everyone at the table actually wants to be there. Funny how that works.